You know, we all have this idea of science as a kind of perfect machine, one that cranks out absolute, undeniable truths. But what if I told you that very idea, that perfect image, is actually what makes science so easy to attack? Today, we're going to explore a much more realistic and, frankly, a much stronger way to think about what science really is. Right here, the philosopher of science Hasok Chang just nails the problem. We've built up this overblown image of science as this flawless source of certainty. So, what happens when the messy human reality of doing science doesn't match that impossible standard? Well, it creates an opening for critics to just dismiss the whole thing. And that really brings us to our big question for this explainer. Why is our standard picture of science so fragile, so brittle? And is there a better way to think about it all? One that can actually hold up in the real world with all its messy debates? Okay, first things first. Let's dig into the completely unrealistic standard we've accidentally set for science. We've basically been taught to expect science to give us a God's eye point of view, right? A final, complete story of how reality works, one that's true everywhere, for everyone, for all time. But here's the thing, that's not how science actually works. It's a standard that no human activity could possibly ever meet. And this is where it gets really dangerous. When a huge scientific consensus, think evolution or climate change, can't offer that 100% absolute final proof because nothing can, it gets hit with that classic line, it's just a theory. This impossible standard lets any other idea, no matter how little evidence it has, be treated as an equal. And that makes science incredibly easy to undermine. So how in the world did we end up with this fragile ideal? Well, the work of philosopher Stephen Tolman gives us a pretty big clue, and for that, we need to go back a few hundred years. Tolman points out this really important distinction. See, before the 1600s, the ideal was what he called reasonableness. It was all about practical wisdom, how to handle specific, messy, ambiguous problems in the real world. But then, in the 17th century, a new ideal took over, rationality. This was all about chasing the kind of absolute certainty you'd find in geometry or formal logic. The whole goal shifted from practical solutions to universal abstract truth. And you can really see this shift play out over time. You had thinkers like Montaigne who were totally comfortable with skepticism and uncertainty. But then along comes Descartes, who was obsessed with finding a method for absolute certainty, just like a math proof. And that quest for certainty ended up dominating Western thought, with science becoming its poster child. And that's how we got the brittle ideal we're dealing with today. Okay, so we've diagnosed the problem and looked at its history. So what's the solution? Well, this is where Hasok Chang's work comes back in with a really powerful alternative. For centuries, the philosophical definition of knowledge has been justified true belief. I know, it sounds a bit academic, but basically, it just means you know something if you have a collection of true facts in your head. Like, the Earth revolves around the sun. It's all about possessing the right information. Chang just flips this entire idea on its head. He says we should think about knowledge primarily as an ability. It's not just knowing that something is true, it's knowing how to do things, knowing how to build a car, how to perform surgery, how to run a successful experiment. Knowledge isn't just a thing you have, it's a capacity for action. And this right here, this is the absolute game changer. Instead of chasing this abstract, absolute capital T truth, we should be asking a much more practical question. Does this piece of knowledge actually let us do things successfully in the world? Does it work? Chang calls the new benchmark for this operational coherence. It sounds a bit fancy, but it's actually super simple. It just means that good knowledge is whatever lets you set a clear goal, line up all the pieces you need, your thoughts, your tools, your actions, and then actually achieve that goal. It's about doing what makes sense to get something done. So if you start thinking this way, it has huge implications. It actually lets us rebuild our understanding of these enormous concepts like truth and reality on much, much stronger and more practical foundations. So what does truth mean in this new view? Well, a statement is true to the degree that it helps us get things done. The belief that water is H2O is true because it allows us to successfully run countless chemical reactions and build whole industries. Its truth is proven by its usefulness, by its effectiveness. In reality, this is really cool. It's not some prepackaged thing just sitting out there waiting for us. It's mind-framed, meaning we need our concepts, our theories, to even be able to see it and interact with it. But, and this is so crucial, it is not mind-controlled. We can't just wish it into being whatever we want. Reality is what resists us. Reality is what pushes back and tells you, nope, that theory's wrong. Try again. Let's make this super concrete with a great example from the history of chemistry. For more than 100 years, chemists used a theory about a substance called phlogiston to explain fire. And then a new theory came along, oxygen. Now here's the wild part. The phlogiston theory wasn't just some silly mistake. For its time, it worked. It let chemists explain things, make successful predictions, and conduct experiments that got results. The oxygen theory also worked, and yeah, in a lot of ways it worked even better and opened up a ton of new doors. The point is, both of these concepts were tools that let scientists productively engage with reality. So this leads to a pretty mind-bending question. If both phlogiston and oxygen were concepts that allowed scientists to successfully do things in the world, does that mean that, in a practical sense, they were both real within their own systems? This idea hints at something called ontological pluralism, the notion that there might be more than one valid way to describe reality. And this is where it all comes together. This is the payoff. By adopting this whole perspective, we end up with a much more robust, a much more defensible view of science. Chang calls it a realism for realistic people. Now, it is so important to get this straight. This is not a retreat into anything goes relativism. Not at all. It's actually the opposite. This is a tough, pragmatic realism that's grounded in what we can successfully do, not just what we can prove in the abstract. It's a realism built for the real world. So what does this new realism look like? Well, it's got a few key features. It embraces pluralism, it accepts that different theories can be useful, it sees progress as iteration. We're constantly improving and refining our abilities, not just marching towards some single final truth. It demands humility, admitting we always have a human perspective. And most importantly, it's all about action. It values knowledge for what it lets us do. And here is the bottom line. This is the big takeaway. Thinking about science this way makes it stronger, not weaker. A science that's defined by its ability to get things done can easily handle a failed experiment or a heated debate. Its strength comes from practical success, not from a fragile, brittle claim to absolute certainty. So maybe it's time we reframe the whole conversation. Instead of getting hung up on whether a theory is the absolute truth, what if we judged every new discovery, every new idea, by a much more powerful and exciting question? Okay, what new things can we do with this?